Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The coffee shop smelled like burnt sugar and desperation, a combination I'd grown far too familiar with over the past year. Rain hammered against the foggy windows, blurring the streetlights outside into orange smears that looked like dying stars. I sat in the corner booth, the vinyl seat cracked and cold beneath my thighs, wearing the most unflattering outfit I could cobble together from my closet. An oversized beige sweater that swallowed my frame, baggy cargo pants that made my legs look shapeless, and thick-rimmed glasses I didn't actually need. My blonde hair, usually my one vanity, was scraped back into a messy bun that pulled at my scalp. I looked like someone who'd given up, which, in a way, I had. "You're really going through with this?" My phone screen glowed with Sarah's text, sent 10 minutes ago. She'd been the one to set up this blind date, swearing that Derek from her office was nice and normal. 2 words that had become my holy grail after the disaster with Ryan. Ryan, who'd seemed charming until the night I discovered him in bed with my roommate. Ryan, who'd looked at me afterward and said, "You were always too much work anyway." Too much work. The words had burrowed under my skin like splinters, festering. So when Sarah suggested this blind date, I'd agreed with one condition: I wouldn't try. If Derek was going to like me, he'd have to like me at my absolute worst. No makeup, no effort, no vulnerability that could be weaponized later. I texted back, "Already here, looking like a potato. Perfect." The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up. Expecting to see Derek, Sarah had shown me his photo, a bland accountant type with a receding hairline and a friendly smile. Safe, harmless. Instead, the man who walked in made the air shift. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe. Dark hair, almost black, fell across his forehead in a way that looked artfully careless, but probably wasn't. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. And his eyes, even from across the room, I could see they were the color of steel just before it melts in a forge. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than my rent, and beneath it, I glimpsed a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Everyone in the coffee shop felt it. Conversations stuttered, heads turned. A barista dropped a cup behind the counter. He shouldn't have been here. Men like that didn't exist in places like this, with linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights. His gaze swept the room, methodical, assessing. When it landed on me, something strange happened. His eyes widened, just a fraction, and his entire body went still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a predator that's just spotted prey. No, not prey. Something else. Something that made my heart kick against my ribs like a trapped bird. He moved toward my table. Each step was deliberate, controlled, as if he was fighting against some invisible force pulling him forward. The air seemed to thicken around us, charged with something I couldn't name. My fingers tightened around my lukewarm coffee cup, the ceramic warm and slick against my palms. This wasn't Derek. This couldn't be Derek. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was like smoke, rough and dark and intimate. "Is this seat taken?" I blinked up at him, my brain scrambling to catch up. "I'm waiting for someone. I know." He slid into the booth across from me without invitation, his movements fluid despite his size. Up close, he was even more devastating. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, and there was something ancient in his eyes, something that made him look simultaneously 30 and 300. "You're waiting for Derek." My stomach dropped. "How do you—" Derek couldn't make it. He leaned back. but the casual pose didn't match the intensity in his gaze. He was still staring at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, like I'd done something impossible just by existing. I'm here instead. Red flags waved frantically in my mind. Strange man. Knows too much. I should leave. I should grab my bag and walk out and block Sarah's number for setting me up with whatever this was, but I didn't move. That's not how blind dates work, I said, trying to sound annoyed instead of terrified. Or intrigued. God, why was I intrigued? You can't just substitute people like ingredients in a recipe. His lips twitched, almost a smile. I apologize for the irregularity. My name is Nathaniel. He extended his hand across the table. Long fingers, calloused palms. A silver ring on his right thumb that looked older than anything in this building. I didn't take his hand. Where's Derek? Safe, unharmed, compensated for his time. Nathaniel's hand remained extended, patient. I convinced him that his presence tonight would be redundant. Convinced him. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds ominous. It wasn't meant to. Finally, he lowered his hand, but his gaze never wavered. I saw you through the window. I had to meet you. The honesty in his voice disarmed me more than any lie could have. There was something raw in it, almost vulnerable, which seemed impossible for a man who looked like he could buy and sell this entire city block. So you bribed my blind date and inserted yourself into my evening, I said flatly. That's either very romantic or very serial killer-esque. I haven't decided which. This time he did smile, and it transformed his face completely. The severity melted into something boyish, almost shy. I'm not a serial killer. That's exactly what a serial killer would say. Fair point. He tilted his head, studying me. You dressed like this on purpose. It wasn't a question. Heat crept up my neck. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle, but his eyes saw too much. The clothes that don't fit. The glasses you keep adjusting because you're not used to them. You're hiding. My throat tightened. Nobody was supposed to notice. That was the entire point. Maybe I just have bad fashion sense. No. He leaned forward, and suddenly the table between us felt like nothing. You're testing. You want to see if someone will stay when you give them every reason to leave. The accuracy of it stole my breath. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words stuck in my throat. Rain continued its assault on the windows, and somewhere in the background, a jazz song played through tinny speakers, all saxophone and longing. Who hurt you? Nathaniel asked quietly. The question cracked something open inside me. I looked down at my coffee, at the cold foam forming a skin on top. That's not really first date conversation. This isn't a first date. Not really. He paused. Though I'd like it to be. I laughed, a sharp sound with no humor. You don't even know me. I know you're brave enough to show up looking like this because you'd rather be alone than be loved for the wrong reasons. His intensity was almost unbearable. I know you're sitting in the corner because you like to see all the exits. I know you've been holding your phone under the table for the past 2 minutes, probably with 911 half-dialed. I was. My thumb was literally hovering over the call button. I know, he continued, softer now, that you have the saddest eyes I've ever seen, and the most beautiful. Something in my chest twisted painfully. Stop. Why? Because you're good at this. My voice came out strangled. You're too good at this, and I can't do this again. Understanding flickered across his face. Someone made you think you weren't worth the effort. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Someone made me think I was too much effort. There's a difference. They were wrong. You don't know that. Yes, Nathaniel said, with such absolute certainty that I almost believed him. I do. The barista called out someone's order, shattering the bubble around us. I became aware again of the other people in the shop, of the rain, of reality. This wasn't a fairy tale. Men who looked like Nathaniel didn't walk into coffee shops and fall for women dressed like they'd given up on life. I should go, I said, already reaching for my bag. His hand shot out, not grabbing, just hovering near mine. Please don't. Why do you even want me to stay? Look at me. I gestured at my outfit, my bare face. I'm nothing special. I'm not trying to be. I am looking at you. His voice dropped to something almost reverent. I haven't stopped looking at you since I walked in, and what I see is someone who's been convinced she needs to make herself smaller to be loved. Someone who's so afraid of being hurt again that she'd rather hide than hope. He leaned closer, and I could smell him now, cedar and rain and something wild, like forests at midnight. But you showed up anyway. You're here. That takes more courage than you know. My eyes burned. I would not cry in front of this stranger. I wouldn't. 1 hour, Nathaniel said. Give me 1 hour. If at the end of it you want to leave, I'll walk away and never bother you again. But if there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility, that you feel what I felt the moment I saw you, then stay. What did you feel? I whispered. His eyes held mine, storm gray and fathomless. Like I'd been searching for something my entire life without knowing it. And then there you were, sitting in the corner of a coffee shop, dressed like you were trying to disappear. But you didn't disappear. You couldn't. Not to me. The rain hammered harder, and somewhere in the city, thunder rolled like a warning, or maybe like a beginning. I put my bag back down. 1 hour, I said. His smile was like sunrise. The hour stretched into 3, and the coffee shop's closing time came and went before I realized how much time had passed. The barista, a college kid with purple hair, had wiped down every table twice and was now shooting us increasingly pointed looks. Nathaniel seemed oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care. I suspected the latter. We'd talked about everything and nothing. He'd asked me about my work. I was a translator for a small publishing house, spending my days turning French novels into English, and had listened like every word mattered. Not the polite listening of someone waiting for their turn to talk, but genuine attention that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. When I'd stumbled over explaining why I loved my job, something about preserving the soul of a story while changing its skin, his eyes had lit up with understanding. Language is a kind of magic, he'd said. The same truth, translated, becomes something new, something that couldn't exist without you as the conduit. Nobody had ever made my job sound important before. Necessary, maybe. Useful. But not important. In turn, he'd told me he worked in security and acquisitions, which sounded deliberately vague. When I'd pressed, he'd smiled that devastating smile and said, I protect people. I make sure certain agreements are honored. It's boring, really. Nothing about him seemed boring. The barista cleared his throat loudly. Nathaniel finally glanced over, and something passed between them, a look that made the kid go pale and suddenly remember he had something to do in the back room. We should go, I said, watching the barista's hasty retreat with unease. That was weird. I'll make sure he's compensated for staying late. Nathaniel stood, and even that simple movement was graceful. He held out his hand to help me from the booth. This time I took it. His palm was warm, calloused, and the moment our skin touched, electricity shot up my arm. His fingers tightened around mine, just for a second, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. I felt that too, he murmured. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist that haloed the streetlights. The city at night was transformed, all gleaming pavement and neon reflections. Nathaniel's coat fell open, and I caught a glimpse of his suit again, expensive and perfect. Next to him, in my baggy clothes and borrowed glasses, I looked like we belonged to different species. Where do you live? He asked. I'll get you home safely. I can take the bus. I'm sure you can. But I'd prefer to see you home myself. He pulled out his phone and typed something. Within 30 seconds, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, not a taxi. A private car with tinted windows and chrome that gleamed even in the dim light. My instincts screamed again. Rich, powerful, dangerous. Nathaniel. I took a step back. Who are you really? He turned to face me fully, and in the streetlight, his features looked carved from stone. Beautiful and hard and eternal. Someone who wants to keep you safe. That's not an answer. I know. He held the car door open, waiting. But it's the only one I can give you tonight. Trust is earned, not given. I understand that. But I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me take you home. I should have walked away. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away. Instead, I thought about his eyes when he'd said I had courage. I thought about the way he'd listened when I talked about preserving souls through translation. I thought about how, for 3 hours, I'd forgotten to feel broken. I got in the car. The interior was all black leather and subtle lighting. Soft music played, something classical and wordless. Nathaniel slid in beside me, maintaining a respectful distance, and gave an address to the driver I hadn't even noticed. A man with silver hair and a scar across his jaw, who nodded once and pulled smoothly into traffic. "How did you know where I live?" I asked. "I didn't. You're going to tell me." "Oh. Right." I rattled off my address, watching the city slide by through tinted windows. We were heading toward my neighborhood, a modest area filled with old brownstones and corner bodegas. Nowhere near the polished downtown where men like Nathaniel probably lived. Why me? The question came out quieter than I'd intended. There were other women in that coffee shop, prettier women, women who actually tried. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, staring out at the passing streets. When he spoke, his voice carried an ache I hadn't heard before. "Do you believe in fate?" "No." The answer came automatically. Fate is just a story we tell ourselves to make random pain feel purposeful. He turned to look at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "What happened to you?" "I told you. Someone decided I wasn't worth the effort." "Tell me everything." And somehow, in the dark cocoon of that car, with this stranger who felt less like a stranger with every passing minute, I did. I told him about Ryan, about finding them together, about the way my roommate, my best friend since college, had looked at me with pity instead of shame. About how Ryan had been so calm, so reasonable, as he explained that I was emotionally exhausting and needed too much reassurance, and he'd tried to make it work, but couldn't. I told him about the months after, about how I'd stopped looking in mirrors because I hated what I saw. Not my face, exactly, but the person behind it, the one who'd believed she was loved. The one who'd been stupid enough to trust. So when Sarah suggested this blind date, I finished. My voice rough, I agreed. But I decided I wouldn't try. If someone was going to choose me, they'd have to choose me like this, broken, messy, not trying to be anything other than what I am. The car had stopped. I hadn't even noticed. We were parked outside my building, a 4-story brownstone with a crooked front step, and windows that rattled in the wind. Nathaniel's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Where is he now? Ryan?" I blinked. I don't know. Why? No reason. But his hands were clenched into fists on his thighs, and there was something dangerous in his stillness. "You know he was wrong. About all of it. You don't know me well enough to say that. Then let me know you." He turned toward me, and the intensity was back, burning through the careful distance he'd maintained. "Let me prove to you that you're not too much. That you're exactly enough. That you're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. I've never felt like this before. "I look at you and I feel like I can finally breathe. Like I've been drowning my entire life and your air." My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it's too fast. Because I don't know you. Because—" My voice cracked. "Because what if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and realize I am too much work?" Nathaniel reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving me every chance to pull away. His hand cupped my jaw, thumb brushing my cheekbone. His touch was gentle, reverent, like I was something precious. "I won't," he said simply. "I can't explain how I know, but I do. You're mine. You were mine the moment I saw you." The possessiveness should have scared me. Instead, it lit something warm and fierce in my chest. "I'm not anybody's," I whispered. "Not yet." He smiled, small and secret. "But you will be, if you let yourself." The driver cleared his throat gently. I pulled away from Nathaniel's touch, immediately missing the warmth. "I should go inside," I said. "Can I see you again?" "I don't know if that's a good idea. Please." Just one word, but weighted with something that sounded like desperation. "Tomorrow, Let me take you to dinner, somewhere nice. You can dress however you want, like this or not like this. I don't care. I just want to see you again. I knew I should say no. This was too intense, too fast, too much like a story that would end badly. But when I looked at his face, at the hope and hunger and something almost like fear in his eyes, I couldn't. Tomorrow, I agreed, 7 o'clock. Pick me up here. His smile could have lit the entire city. I'll be here at 6:30. 7, I insisted. 6:45. Despite everything, I laughed. Fine, 6:45. But if you're late, I'm leaving. I won't be late. He got out and opened my door, offering his hand again. I took it. Let him help me out onto the rain-slick sidewalk. He walked me to the building's entrance, and for a moment, we just stood there, neither wanting to break the spell. Thank you, he said softly. For staying, for trusting me. I'm not sure I do trust you yet, I admitted. But I want to. That's enough. That's more than enough. He stepped back, hands in his pockets like he didn't trust himself not to reach for me again. Sleep well, Emma. I froze. I never told you my name. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or resignation. No, you didn't. How did you? Tomorrow, he said. I'll explain everything tomorrow. I promise. Just don't run. Please don't run. He got back in the car before I could respond, and it pulled away smoothly, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my heart racing and my mind spinning with questions. I should have been scared. I should have called Sarah, or the police, or someone. Instead, I went inside and dreamed of storm-gray eyes and hands that touched me like I was precious. I didn't sleep. How could I? When every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathaniel's face, felt the ghost of his hand against my jaw, heard his voice saying, "You're mine," like it was an inevitable truth rather than a presumption. At 4 a.m, I gave up and made coffee, sitting by my kitchen window and watching the city wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A man walked 3 small dogs that looked like animated dust mops. Normal life, continuing as if my entire world hadn't tilted on its axis in a single evening. He'd known my name. I'd replayed that moment 100 times, and there was no mistaking it. I'd never told him, and the fear in his eyes when I'd called him on it had been real, which meant either Sarah had told him, unlikely, since she didn't even know Derek had been replaced, or he'd found out some other way. The smart thing would be to cancel, to block his number. Did I even have his number? And forget last night ever happened. Men who knew things they shouldn't know, who made baristas go pale with a single look, who had drivers and expensive cars and talked about owning people. Those men were dangerous. But I'd spent the last year being smart, being careful, protecting myself so thoroughly that I'd stopped living entirely. And for 3 hours last night, sitting across from a stranger in a dying coffee shop, I'd felt alive again. At 6 a.m, I texted Sarah. Did you tell Derek my name? Her response came 20 minutes later. Obviously. It was a blind date, not a witness protection program. Why? Did it go okay? So Derek had known, and Nathaniel had convinced Derek to... What? Give him the date instead? My phone suddenly felt heavy in my hands. I typed out, Derek didn't show. Someone else came instead. Did you know about that? 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, what? Who? Emma, are you okay? Do I need to come over? I'm fine. His name is Nathaniel. Did Derek mention him? No. Derek didn't say anything about not going. I'm calling him right now. I waited, my coffee growing cold. When Sarah called me 15 minutes later, her voice was tight with worry. Okay. So I just talked to Derek, and he's being super weird. He kept saying he had a business opportunity come up last night and had to cancel. But when I pushed him, he got really cagey. Emma, who is this Nathaniel guy? Did he hurt you? No. I stood up, pacing my small kitchen. He was intense, but not dangerous. I don't think. You don't think? That's not exactly reassuring. I'm seeing him again tonight. Silence. Then, Emma, are you insane? Some strange man bribes or threatens or whatever'd your date, shows up instead, somehow knows your name, and you're going out with him again? When she put it like that, it did sound insane. I can't explain it. There's something about him. I know it sounds crazy, but it sounds like the beginning of a true crime podcast. Sarah's voice softened. Look, I get it. After Ryan, you're looking for something different, but different doesn't mean safe. Can you at least tell me where you're going? And maybe text me every hour so I know you're not being made into a lampshade? Despite everything, I smiled. I'll text you. I promise. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous energy. I cleaned my apartment, which was already clean. I tried to work on a translation, a moody French literary novel about loss and memory, but the words swam in front of my eyes. Finally, at 4 o'clock, I forced myself to think about what I was going to wear. Last night had been a test, a way to protect myself by ensuring disappointment. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wanted, what? To be seen? To be beautiful? To prove to myself that I could still try? I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in over a year. Deep emerald green, simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that fell just above my knee. It had been an impulse purchase, back when I'd still believed in impulses, in the idea that sometimes you bought a dress just because it made you feel like someone worth knowing. I showered, dried my hair until it fell in pale waves around my shoulders, applied makeup with a shaking hand. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked so different, but because I'd forgotten this version of me existed, the one who smiled at her reflection. The one who felt anticipation instead of dread. At exactly 6:45, my intercom buzzed. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed my coat, a simple black wool that at least wouldn't clash with the dress, and headed downstairs. When I opened the building's front door, Nathaniel was standing on the sidewalk, and the look on his face made every nervous moment of the day worth it. He stared at me like I'd punched him, like I'd performed a miracle, like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Emma. My name was a prayer in his mouth. He looked different too, still devastating, but less severe. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look like molten silver, with a leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a vulnerability in his expression that hadn't been there last night. You look... He trailed off, shaking his head. I don't have words. You're stunning. Heat crept up my neck. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. I was terrified you wouldn't be here. The admission came out rough, that you'd have thought about last night and decided I was too. He stopped, seeming to search for the right word. Intense? I supplied. Mysterious? Slightly stalkerish? His lips quirked. Any or all of the above. I almost didn't come down, I admitted. My friend thinks you're going to turn me into a lampshade. A lampshade? He looked genuinely confused. Serial killer thing. Never mind. I pulled my coat tighter, suddenly nervous. You said you'd explain. About how you knew my name. His expression sobered. I will. But not here. Not standing on the street. Let me take you to dinner first, please. I promise. By the end of the night, you'll know everything. The same car as last night pulled up. The same silver-haired driver at the wheel. Nathaniel opened the door for me, and I slid in, hyper-aware of his presence as he settled beside me. Tonight, he sat closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell that cedar and rain scent that had haunted my dreams. Where are we going? I asked as the car pulled into traffic. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can talk. He glanced at me, then looked away, as if the sight of me was too much. You wore a dress. I can change. I have time to run back up and... No! His hand caught mine, fingers intertwining. Don't change. Don't ever change. I just meant... Last night you were hiding. Tonight you're not. Maybe I'm just hiding differently. I stared at our joined hands, at the way his thumb brushed absently across my knuckles. The dress is armor too, just prettier armor. I know. He squeezed gently. But you're here. That's what matters. We drove for 20 minutes, leaving my familiar neighborhood behind, and heading into a part of the city I rarely visited. Old money territory, where buildings had doormen and trees were planted in neat rows along pristine sidewalks. The car finally stopped in front of a restaurant I'd only read about, Solstice, a place where reservations were made months in advance and entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Nathaniel, I can't, this is too much. It's not enough," he said quietly. "Nothing would be enough, but it's a start." The maitre d' greeted Nathaniel by name, led us through a dining room of hushed conversations and crystal chandeliers to a private booth in the back. Secluded, intimate, with velvet curtains that could be drawn for complete privacy, a single candle flickered on the white tablecloth, casting dancing shadows. "Your usual table, Mr. Thorne," the maitre d' said, handing us leather-bound menus. Thorne. So that was his last name, Nathaniel Thorne. It fit him. Something beautiful and dangerous, designed to draw blood. Once we were alone, Nathaniel leaned back and studied me in the candlelight. "You have questions." "About 1,000. I set down my menu without looking at it. "But let's start with the obvious one. How did you know my name?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched him struggle with something internal. Finally, he said, "I had Derek investigated." My stomach dropped. "Investigated? When I saw you through the window, I knew I had to meet you, so I found out who you were meeting, tracked him down, and convinced him to let me take his place." He met my eyes steadily, not flinching from what he was admitting. I offered him a substantial amount of money and an introduction to a business contact he'd been trying to reach for months. He took the deal. Part of that deal included information about you. I should have been angry. I should have stood up and walked out. Instead, I just felt tired. "So you bought your way into my life?" "Yes." No apology in his voice, just honesty. "And I'd do it again. I'd do far worse if it meant getting to know you." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "You don't know me. You can't possibly. Whatever you think you feel, it's not real. It's an idea. A fantasy. You're wrong." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. "I knew the moment I saw you. It was like being asleep my entire life and suddenly waking up. Like every choice I'd ever made had been leading me to that coffee shop, to that moment, to you. That's not how the world works. Isn't it?" His eyes held mine. "You translate books, Emma, stories about fate and love and destiny. You spend your days finding ways to make magic work in a different language. How can you believe in those stories but not believe in this? Because stories are safe." My voice cracked. "Stories can't hurt me. I won't hurt you. You can't promise that. You're right." He sat back, and something in his expression shifted, became harder, more honest. "I can't promise I won't hurt you. People hurt each other, even when they don't mean to, even when they'd cut off their own arm before causing pain. But I can promise that I'll try every single day not to. I can promise that if I do hurt you, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." A waiter appeared, breaking the tension. We ordered, or rather, Nathaniel ordered for both of us, choosing dishes with a familiarity that suggested he ate here often. I should have been annoyed by the presumption, but instead I felt oddly cared for. After the waiter left, I forced myself to ask the next question. "What do you do, really? And don't say security and acquisitions." "I run a company. Several companies, actually. My family has been in business for generations." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We handle situations that require discretion, delicacy, sometimes force. We protect people who need protecting and ensure that agreements, once made, are honored." That sounds like the mob. It's not the mob. But he didn't elaborate, and I had the sense that whatever his family business actually was, it existed in a gray area where normal laws didn't quite apply. "Are you dangerous?" I asked. "Yes." No hesitation. "But never to you." "How can you know that?" "Because the thought of you in pain." His hands clenched on the table. "Because I'd sooner die than cause you harm. I know how that sounds. I know I'm asking you to trust me based on nothing but instinct. But Emma, you have good instincts. You knew something was off about me from the start. And you stayed anyway. Trust that instinct now. Our food arrived." beautiful and artful on white plates. I picked at my appetizer, some kind of delicate seafood thing that probably tasted amazing but turned to ash in my mouth. Across from me, Nathaniel ate mechanically, his attention never leaving my face. "Tell me about your family," I said, desperate to shift to safer ground. His expression shuddered. "There's not much to tell. My parents are dead. I have a brother, but we're not close. The company is my family now, the people who work for me. I'm sorry. About your parents." It was a long time ago, but pain flickered in his eyes, old and deep. "What about you? Any family?" "My mom lives upstate. We talk every Sunday. My dad left when I was 12. I shrugged, trying to make it casual. Pretty standard divorce story. He just decided he wanted a different life, one that didn't include us." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Did he ever try to come back?" "No. I used to think he would, when I was a kid. I'd imagine him showing up at my birthday parties or school plays, realizing he'd made a mistake. But he never did. Eventually, I stopped imagining." "That's where it comes from," Nathaniel said softly. "The fear that you're too much work. Your father made you believe that if you were just less, just smaller, just easier, he would have stayed." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Don't." But he was wrong, Emma. He was a coward who couldn't handle the responsibility of loving someone as deeply as you deserve to be loved. So he convinced you it was your fault, that you were the problem. "Stop." My voice broke. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to see inside me like this." "Why not?" He reached across the table but stopped short of touching me. "Why can't I see you? The real you, not the version you show to protect yourself. Because it hurts." The words burst out, too loud in the quiet restaurant. I lowered my voice to a harsh whisper. "Because every time someone sees the real me, they leave. My dad, Ryan, my college roommate who I thought was my best friend. Everyone who gets close enough to see what's actually inside me decides it's not worth it. I'm not them. How do I know that? How do I know you won't wake up one day and realize I'm just too much?" Nathaniel stood up, and for a moment, I thought he was leaving. Instead, he slid into the booth beside me, so close our thighs touched. He turned my face toward him, gentle but insistent. "Look at me," he commanded. When I did, his eyes were blazing. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. Power, money, protection, influence. Every relationship I've ever had was transactional. But the moment I saw you, sitting in that coffee shop wearing clothes that didn't fit and looking like you'd rather be anywhere else, I felt something I've never felt before. Peace. Like I'd been fighting a war I didn't know I was in. And you were the ceasefire. Nathaniel, I'm not finished. His thumb brushed my cheek, catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "You think you're too much? You're not enough much. You're not enough demanding, enough present, enough insistent on being loved the way you deserve, and I want to be the one who teaches you that. Who shows you that you're not a burden to be tolerated but a gift to be cherished." I was crying openly now, silent tears that I couldn't stop. He pulled me against his chest, one hand cradling the back of my head, and I let myself break in the safety of his arms. "I'm scared," I whispered into his sweater. "I know. So am I." I pulled back enough to see his face. "You're scared?" "Terrified." He smiled, sad and beautiful. "What if I'm not enough for you? What if I can't be what you need? What if I fail you the way everyone else has?" The vulnerability in his confession cracked something open inside me. We were both broken, both terrified, both certain we'd mess this up. But we were here anyway, trying despite the fear. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Neither do I." He kissed my forehead, light and reverent. "But we'll figure it out together." We stayed in that booth for hours, talking until the restaurant emptied and the staff began giving us pointed looks. Nathaniel didn't seem to notice or care, and I realized with a strange sort of wonder that he really would have sat there all night if I'd wanted to, just talking, just being. He told me about growing up in a world of expectations and duty, where every action was calculated for maximum advantage. About learning to read people not because he wanted to, but because survival depended on knowing who would betray you before they got the chance. About the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw him as a resource rather than a person. I told him about my mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after my father left, who'd never once made me feel like I was the reason he'd gone even though I'd spent years believing it anyway. About discovering books and languages as an escape. About how translation felt like the closest thing to magic I'd ever experienced. Taking something beautiful and making it accessible to people who couldn't otherwise reach it. "You're a bridge," Nathaniel said at one point, his eyes bright with understanding. "Between worlds, between languages, you connect things that were never meant to touch." The observation settled into my chest like a key finding its lock. It was past midnight when we finally left the restaurant. The maître d' didn't comment on the time, just wished Nathaniel a pleasant evening with a knowing smile that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd stayed after hours. Outside, the city had transformed into something else entirely. All shadow and distant sirens and the kind of quiet that only comes after midnight. "I should get you home," Nathaniel said, but he made no move toward the car. We stood on the sidewalk, the space between us charged with something unnamed. "I don't want to go home yet," I heard myself say. His eyes darkened. "Emma, show me something real, something that matters to you." I stepped closer, emboldened by the wine we'd drunk with dinner and the intimacy of the evening. "I've let you see inside me. Let me see inside you." He studied my face for a long moment, and I watched him wage some internal war. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. But you have to trust me. I'm trying to. That's enough." We got in the car, and Nathaniel gave the driver an address in a part of the city I didn't recognize. We drove in comfortable silence, his hand finding mine in the darkness, our fingers intertwining like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched the city pass by, block after block of sleeping buildings and late-night wanderers, and felt something settle in my chest, not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. The car stopped in front of a nondescript warehouse in what looked like an industrial district. No lights except a single fixture above a steel door. No signs, no indication of what the building might house. Nathaniel helped me out of the car, then paused. "This is the part where you decide if you really trust me," he said quietly. "Because what I'm about to show you, very few people know about, and once you see it, you can't unsee it." My heart hammered, but I lifted my chin. "Show me." He led me to the door, pressed his palm against a scanner I hadn't noticed, and it swung open with a soft hiss. Inside was a long hallway, industrial and cold, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Our footsteps echoed as we walked, and I noticed security cameras in every corner, tracking our movement. "Nathaniel, what is this place?" "You'll see." At the end of the hallway was another door, this one requiring both a palm scan and a code. Nathaniel entered a series of numbers too quickly for me to follow, and the door opened onto something impossible. It was a training facility, that much was immediately obvious. But unlike any gym I'd ever seen, the space was enormous, easily the size of a football field, with sections devoted to different purposes: combat mats, obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and everywhere people, dozens of them, all moving with lethal grace, all training even at this late hour. But it wasn't the facility that made my breath catch. It was the people themselves. They moved wrong, too fast, too fluid. Impossible jumps and strikes that defied physics. And their eyes, when several of them turned to look at us, their eyes reflected the light like animals in the dark. "What?" My voice came out as a whisper. Nathaniel's hand tightened on mine. "I told you my family protects people. This is how. These are my people, Emma. This is what we are." A woman approached us, tall and muscular with short dark hair and those same reflective eyes. She looked at Nathaniel with a deference that was almost reverence, then turned her gaze to me with frank curiosity. "Alpha," she said, and the word made no sense but also all the sense in the world. "You brought someone here. This is Emma." Nathaniel's voice carried an edge of command I hadn't heard before. "She's under my protection. Spread the word." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Under your protection or Victoria?" A single word, but weighted with warning. Victoria smiled, sharp and knowing. "Understood. Welcome, Emma. I'm Victoria, the Alpha's second. If you hurt him, I'll make you regret being born. Otherwise, we'll get along great." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring after her in confusion. I turned to Nathaniel, who was watching me with an expression caught between hope and fear. "I don't understand," I said. "I know. Let's go somewhere quieter, and I'll explain." He led me to a glass-walled office overlooking the training floor. Inside was simple: a desk, chairs, bookshelves lined with titles I couldn't read from this distance. Nathaniel closed the door, and the sounds from outside muffled to a dull roar. "Sit down," he said gently. I sat, my legs suddenly unsteady. Nathaniel paced for a moment, running his hands through his hair, before finally stopping in front of me. "There's no good way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Emma, I'm not entirely human." Silence. My brain tried to process the words and failed. "What?" "I'm what's called a werewolf, so as everyone you saw out there, we're a pack, and I'm their alpha, their leader." He held up a hand before I could speak. "I know how it sounds. I know every instinct you have is screaming that I'm insane, but it's the truth." I stood up, needing to move, needing to think. "Werewolves. You're telling me werewolves are real?" "Yes, and you're their king?" "Alpha King," that woman said. "There are many packs. I lead several of them. I'm responsible for keeping the peace, for protecting our people from exposure, from hunters, from other supernatural threats." Supernatural. The word bounced around my skull. I thought about the way people reacted to him. The almost preternatural stillness. The intensity that seemed too large for a normal human body. The way he'd known things he shouldn't know. Moved with impossible grace. Commanded with a voice that demanded obedience. "Prove it," I said. His eyes widened. "Emma, if it's true, prove it. Show me." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face: fear, hope, resignation. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but don't be afraid. Please, whatever you feel, don't be afraid of me." He stepped back, rolling his shoulders. And then he changed. It wasn't like the movies. There was no screaming transformation, no grotesque breaking of bones. One moment he was Nathaniel, human and beautiful in his gray sweater. The next, his eyes had gone completely silver, glowing in the dim light. His body shifted, became larger, more muscular, more predatory. Claws extended from his fingertips. When he opened his mouth, I saw fangs, but he was still Nathaniel, still the man who'd listened to me talk about translation for hours. Still the man who'd held me while I cried. "Oh my God," I breathed. He shifted back immediately, returning to his human form in seconds. "Emma, please say something, anything. You're real. This is all real." I sat back down, my legs giving out. Werewolves are real. Magic is real. What else is real? Vampires, witches, dragons. Some of those, yes. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands carefully, as if afraid I'd pull away. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you before bringing you here. But I wanted you to see me, to see the world I live in. I needed you to understand why everything I said tonight was true, why I knew the moment I saw you, why I couldn't let you walk away. Why?" My voice was barely audible. "Why me, Nathaniel? I'm nobody. I'm human and ordinary, and you're my mate." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I didn't fully understand but felt in my bones. "Mate," I repeated. "It's rare, finding the one person in the world who completes you, who balances you. Most werewolves never find their mates. Some search for centuries." His thumbs brushed across my knuckles. I'd stopped looking. I'd convinced myself I didn't need it, that I could rule without that kind of connection. And then I walked past a coffee shop and saw you through the window, and everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be wrong. "This is insane," I whispered. "I know. I should run. I should get up and leave and never look back." "I know that too." His voice was rough. "And if you do, I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're safe, that no one from my world ever bothers you. But Emma, please, please don't run." I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who'd seen me at my worst and called me beautiful, who'd held me while I broke and promised to help put me back together, who'd just shown me something impossible and was looking at me like I held his entire world in my hands. "I need time," I said finally. It's a lot. I need to think." Relief and pain warred in his expression. "Of course, take all the time you need." "But I'm not running. Not yet." Hope flickered in his eyes. "No? No." I squeezed his hands. "You said we'd figure this out together. I'm choosing to believe you meant it." He pulled me forward into his arms, and I went willingly, burying my face in his chest and breathing in his scent. Cedar and rain and something wild that I now recognized as intrinsically him. Not human, but not wrong. Just different. "Thank you," he murmured into my hair. "Thank you for staying." We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet office while outside, his people, his pack, trained and lived and existed in a world I'd never known was real. And despite everything, despite the impossibility and the fear and the sheer insanity of it all, I felt safe. Eventually, Nathaniel took me home. We didn't talk much during the drive, but his hand stayed in mine, a constant reassurance. When we reached my building, he walked me to the door again, and we stood in the familiar spot where we'd said goodbye the night before. "Less than 48 hours ago, but it felt like a lifetime. I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "Or not, if you need space." "Whatever you need. Call me," I said. Then, before I could overthink it, I rose on my toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." His hand came up to where my lips had touched, wonder in his eyes. "Good night, Emma." "Good night, Nathaniel." I went inside, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I let myself fully process what had happened. I just learned that werewolves were real, that the man I was falling for wasn't human, that an entire hidden world existed alongside my ordinary one. I should have been terrified. Instead, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I felt something else entirely. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found someone who would stay. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Nathaniel called the next day, as promised, his voice uncertain in a way that made my heart ache. We talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything, carefully avoiding the elephant in the room, while somehow circling it constantly. He didn't push, didn't demand I make a decision about what his revelation meant for us. He just existed in my life, patient and present in a way I'd never experienced before. We saw each other every day. Sometimes it was dinner at quiet restaurants where he'd reserved the most private tables. Sometimes it was walks through the city at night, when the streets belonged to insomniacs and dreamers. Once, he took me to a bookstore that stayed open until midnight, and we wandered the aisles while I told him about my favorite translations, the ones where I'd felt like I'd truly captured something essential. He never hid what he was. I'd catch glimpses of that otherworldly grace, the way his eyes would flash silver when he was emotional, the protective growl that rumbled in his chest when a drunk man got too close to me on the subway. But he never transformed again, never pushed me to engage with that part of his world until I was ready. I spent hours researching online, falling down rabbit holes about werewolf mythology, trying to separate fiction from whatever Nathaniel's reality was. Most of it was useless, Hollywood nonsense about full moons and silver bullets. But occasionally I'd find something that resonated, old folklore that spoke of shapeshifters who protected their communities, who lived by codes of honor and loyalty that seemed almost quaint in the modern world. Sarah noticed the change in me immediately. "Okay, who are you, and what have you done with my best friend?" she demanded over coffee one afternoon. "You're glowing. Actually glowing. This Nathaniel guy must be amazing in bed." "We haven't slept together," I'd said, and watched her jaw drop. "You've been seeing him every day for 2 weeks, and you haven't." "He's not pushing. He's letting me set the pace." Sarah had studied me with narrowed eyes. "And you're okay with that? You, who spent 6 months convinced you'd never trust anyone again?" "I don't know if I'm okay with it," I'd admitted. "But I'm trying. That has to count for something." Now, standing in front of my mirror on a Friday evening, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, though I did, wearing a deep blue dress that Nathaniel had sent over that morning with a note that simply said, "If you're comfortable," but because of the expression on my face. Hope, anticipation, the kind of vulnerability that came from letting someone in even when every instinct screamed to protect yourself. Tonight was different. Tonight, Nathaniel had asked if I'd come to a pack gathering. "They want to meet you," he'd said, and there'd been nervousness in his voice. "You don't have to. I know it's asking a lot, but they're my family, Emma, and you're becoming my world. I want those worlds to meet." I'd said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The knock on my door came at exactly 7. When I opened it, Nathaniel stood there in dark jeans and a black button-down, and the look on his face made the last 3 weeks worth every moment of confusion and fear. "You wore the dress," he said softly. "You sent it. It would have been rude not to." I did a small turn. "Does it look okay? You look like every dream I've ever had made real." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and cupped my face in his hands. "Emma, we don't have to do this. If you're not ready—" "I'm terrified," I interrupted. "But I'm ready. I want to meet them. I want to understand your world." His smile was like sunrise. "They're going to love you. Or they're going to think I'm a liability. A weak human who their alpha has inexplicably fixated on. First, you're not weak. You're the strongest person I know." His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. "Second, they're going to see what I see. Someone extraordinary. Someone worth protecting. I'm really not—" He kissed me. It was our first kiss, and it felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff simultaneously. His lips were soft and sure, moving against mine with a gentleness that made my knees weak. One hand stayed cradling my face, while the other slid to the small of my back, pulling me closer until we were pressed together from chest to thigh. I made a small sound, surprise or pleasure or both, and felt him smile against my mouth. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you. You should have done it sooner," I whispered. "I was afraid you'd run. I'm still here." "Yes." He pulled back to look at me, and his eyes had gone that molten silver. "You are." The gathering was held at a house on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property surrounded by woods that seemed to go on forever. As we pulled up the long driveway, I saw people milling around outside despite the cool evening air. They moved with that same preternatural grace I'd noticed at the warehouse, and as our car approached, dozens of heads turned in unison to track our arrival. "They can smell you," Nathaniel said quietly, noticing my tension. "Smell that you're human, that you're with me. They're curious, not hostile." "That's reassuring," I muttered, and he laughed. Victoria met us at the door, wearing jeans and a leather jacket that somehow looked both casual and dangerous. "Alpha, Emma," she looked me up and down, and something like approval flickered in her eyes. "Nice dress. Come on, everyone's out back." The house was beautiful, all exposed beams and stone fireplaces, rustic but elegant. We walked through to a large backyard where at least 50 people had gathered. A bonfire blazed in the center, and tables laden with food surrounded it. Music played from somewhere, something with a heavy bass that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The moment we stepped outside, conversations died. Every single person turned to stare at us. At me, specifically. I felt the weight of their collective attention like a physical thing, assessing and intense. Nathaniel's hand found mine, squeezing reassuringly. Then he raised his voice, and it carried across the yard with an authority that made my spine straighten. "Everyone, this is Emma. She's my mate, and she's under pack protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone started a slow clap. Others joined in, and suddenly the entire gathering was applauding. Not mockingly, but genuinely, with smiles and nods of approval. "Well," Victoria said beside me, "that could have gone worse." Nathaniel laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Come on. Let me introduce you to everyone." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of names and faces. There was Marcus, a grizzled older man who ran security and looked at me with frank skepticism until I made a joke about supernatural politics being less complicated than my book club, which made him crack a smile. There was Jasmine, a young woman barely out of her teens who asked 1,000 questions about translation work with genuine interest. There was Daniel, Nathaniel's brother, who had the same storm-gray eyes but none of his warmth, and who looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "She's human," Daniel said bluntly when Nathaniel introduced us. "You're bonding yourself to a human. Do you understand what that means for the pack, for alliances?" "Daniel." Nathaniel's voice carried a warning. "No, let him speak," I said, surprising myself. I turned to Daniel, lifting my chin. "You think I'm a weakness, that I'll make your alpha vulnerable." "I think you're a complication." Daniel's gaze was cold, and complications get people killed in our world. "Maybe." I held his stare, refusing to look away. Or maybe having someone who exists outside your world, who sees things differently, is exactly what you need. An outsider's perspective, a bridge between what you are and what everyone else is. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. A bridge. Like translation. Exactly like translation. I felt Nathaniel's hand tighten on mine, could sense his pride even without looking at him. "You protect people from the shadows. But maybe having someone who understands both the shadows and the light could help you do that better." Daniel stared at me for a long moment, then looked at his brother. "She's smart. I'll give you that." "She's everything," Nathaniel said simply. As the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of the gathering. The pack was loud and physical in a way that should have been overwhelming, but somehow wasn't. They touched each other constantly, casual affection and reassurance, hands on shoulders and playful shoves. They laughed too loud and argued passionately about everything from politics to the best way to cook a steak. They were a family, complicated and sometimes contentious, but bound by something deeper than blood. I was sitting by the fire, listening to Jasmine tell a story about her first transformation, when Victoria settled down beside me. "You're doing well," she said quietly. "I'm faking it," I admitted. "We all are, honey. The trick is committing to the fake until it becomes real." She studied me in the firelight. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you in love with him?" The question stole my breath. Was I? I'd been so focused on fear and trust and the impossibility of everything that I hadn't let myself think about love. But sitting there, watching Nathaniel across the fire as he talked with Marcus, seeing the way he kept glancing over to make sure I was okay, feeling the warmth of acceptance from people who had every reason to reject me. "Yes," I whispered. "I think I am." Victoria smiled. "Good. Because he's been in love with you since that first night." It's kind of disgusting, actually. He walks around with this dopey smile, and yesterday he spent 20 minutes debating which flowers to send you. 20 minutes. Our alpha, who once negotiated a peace treaty between 3 hostile packs in under an hour, couldn't decide between roses and peonies. I laughed, tears pricking my eyes. "What did he choose?" "Both. He sent you both, didn't he?" He had. A massive arrangement had arrived yesterday with a note that said, "Couldn't decide which would make you smile more." "He's ridiculous," I said. "He's happy." Victoria stood, brushing off her jeans. "That's all that matters to us. We followed him through some dark times, Emma. Watched him shoulder burdens that would break most people. We've never seen him like this, like he finally found something worth living for instead of just surviving." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring into the fire and processing her words. Nathaniel chose that moment to appear at my side, settling onto the log beside me. "Having fun?" he asked. Surprisingly, yes. I leaned against his shoulder. "Your family is intense. That's a polite way of saying we're a lot." "You are, but in a good way." I watched the flames dance. "Nathaniel, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What happens now? With us, I mean. I'm human. You're not. You'll live for centuries, and I'll age and die. How does this work?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "There are ways. A bite can turn a human, make them one of us. It's risky. Not everyone survives the transformation, but it's possible." My heart hammered. Is that what you want? To turn me? I want you to have a choice. He turned to face me, taking both my hands. I want you to live the life you choose, whether that's as a human or something else. Whether that's with me or without me. Emma, I love you. I've loved you since I saw you through that coffee shop window. But I won't make decisions for you. I won't take away your agency or your humanity unless you ask me to. Tears spilled down my cheeks. You love me? So much it terrifies me. He wiped my tears with his thumbs. I know it's fast. I know by human standards this is insane. But in my world, when you find your mate, you know. And I knew. I knew the moment I saw you that you were mine, that I was yours, that everything before you had been preparation, and everything after would be epilogue. I love you too, I whispered. I'm scared and confused, and I don't understand half of what's happening, but I love you. He kissed me again, there by the fire with his pack around us, and it felt like sealing a promise, like stepping into a future I'd never imagined but somehow always wanted. When we finally pulled apart, the gathering had quieted. Everyone was watching us, but not invasively, with warmth, with acceptance. Pack, Nathaniel called out, his voice carrying. I present to you my mate, Emma, who bridges worlds and translates truth, who chose to stay when she had every reason to run, who sees the best in us, even when we struggle to see it in ourselves. The pack rose as one, and I suddenly understood what was happening. This was a ritual, a formal recognition. Do you accept her? Nathaniel asked. We accept her, came the collective response, dozens of voices speaking as one. Do you pledge to protect her as one of our own? We pledge. Then she is pack. She is family. She is ours. The pack erupted in celebration, howls and cheers and laughter. People came forward to embrace me, to welcome me, and I felt something I'd spent my entire life searching for finally click into place, belonging. Later, much later, Nathaniel took me home. We stood outside my building in the familiar spot, but everything felt different now, changed, better. Stay with me tonight, I said, just to sleep. I don't want to be alone. I'll stay as long as you want me to. We went upstairs, and I changed into pajamas while he waited in the living room. When I emerged, he'd removed his shoes and was looking at the bookshelves I'd lined with translations, both my work and others I admired. Come to bed, I said. We lay together in my small bed, his arms around me and my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was faster than a human's, more powerful but steady, reliable. Emma? His voice rumbled in his chest. Thank you. For giving us a chance. For not running. Thank you for seeing me, the real me. For making me believe I was worth staying for. You are. You're worth everything. I fell asleep like that, safe in the arms of a man who wasn't entirely human, but was entirely mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't have nightmares. I didn't dream of my father leaving, or Ryan's betrayal, or my own inadequacy. I dreamed of forests and moonlight and belonging, of a future where I was both myself and something more, where I translated not just languages but worlds, building bridges between the ordinary and the extraordinary. I dreamed of home. Epilogue. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in Nathaniel's, our bedroom, adjusting the silver pendant he'd given me. It was pack tradition, he'd explained, for mates to wear their alpha's symbol. The pendant was beautiful, a wolf in mid-howl etched in silver, and wearing it made me feel connected to something larger than myself. I'd moved in 3 months ago, after we'd both acknowledged that spending every night apart was ridiculous when we were clearly meant to be together. The warehouse facility had become a second home, and I'd started teaching some of the younger pack members about literature and languages. Turns out, supernatural beings appreciated good stories just as much as humans. I still worked as a translator, but now I also served as a liaison between Nathaniel's pack and the human world they moved through in secret, a bridge, just like I'd told Daniel I could be. Speaking of Daniel, he'd gradually warmed to me, particularly after I'd helped negotiate a treaty with a neighboring pack by finding common ground in their shared histories. Maybe having a human around isn't the worst idea, he'd admitted grudgingly. which Victoria had told me was the closest thing to gushing approval I'd ever get from him. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, watching me with those storm-gray eyes that still made my heart skip. Ready? As I'll ever be. Today was significant. Today, I was officially being presented to the council, the governing body of all the packs in our region. As Nathaniel's mate and a human, my presence would be controversial. But we'd decided together that hiding wasn't an option. If we were going to do this, we'd do it publicly, proudly. Whatever happens, Nathaniel said, crossing to me and pulling me into his arms. We face it together. Together, I agreed. As we left for the council meeting, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The one who'd dressed in ugly clothes for a blind date, convinced that she needed to make herself smaller to be loved, who'd believed she was too much work, too much effort, too much everything. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that letting someone see your scars didn't mean they'd use them as weapons. Someone who'd discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the smallest acts of courage, like staying when every instinct said to run. I'd dressed ugly for a blind date, unaware that the man who would become my whole world was watching through a window. Unaware that werewolves were real and mates existed, and sometimes fairy tales did come true, just in stranger ways than anyone expected. But I knew now, and I wouldn't change a single thing. Nathaniel squeezed my hand as we walked toward the car, toward whatever the council would say, toward our future. And I squeezed back, no longer afraid. I was exactly enough, and I was home.